So Heather, we're talking about the compulsion that seems to exist in the mainstream media to always attempt to maintain some measure of denial when Donald Trump is at his worst. The It's as if the media can many parts of the media, not all media, hashtag whatever, but there's so much desire in the media to sort of normalize everything and to put it in this context of to pretend that daddy's not crazy, you know what I mean? And like, let's just have dinner. And he gets a little bit upset and, this type of thing in terms of Donald Trump and his white supremacy. And the problem is that, I mean, I think part of it is that no one knows what to do in this situation. There's this sense of like, we should do something, right? Like, but what do we do? And with the media, I think they are just afraid. Like, how do you continue the conversation? How do you wake up tomorrow and do your reporting again if you make these assertions about him? And what is your responsibility? And the way it makes things very, very complicated, I think, from their perspective. And so you get things like, maybe this is the day the president, he became president. I mean, he gave that canned speech, right? Where, look, he said, if you were to read the speech and not see him deliver it, you would have been like, this is the speech that he should give. You wouldn't have noticed that he said Toledo instead of Dayton because he doesn't really care what's going on. And he doesn't. But then within days later, not only had we not seen a speech of like, I want to reach out to the Latino community and tell them that you are Americans. And even if you're not Americans, you are safe here. That you have a right to go to the mall and not feel like you're going to be attacked. You have a right to go to Home Depot and not be told to go back to your country. You have the right to, to go to, Price Chopper and not be afraid you're going to get shot up or whatever it is. And not only does he not give that speech, when he's questioned as to, what do you think about the rhetoric being so similar to the guy you used? He just goes off on a tangent and starts attacking people and talking about the problems of immigration. I mean, this is ugly stuff. And why do you think? What is your sense of why the press can't come to terms with this?
Well, to be honest with you, I'm pretty surprised at this point that they are still in that mode. But there are reasons for it. It goes all the way back to the 1960s when when there was violence in the streets, there was protests against the war and what have you. There were a number of reporters in Washington who were really taken aback by this idea of street violence. They just had they couldn't cope with it. And they went out on an anthropological sort of tour that we see them all the time now. But at the time, they were talking to sort of, the quote, real Americans out in regular America who were, conservatives. And they were upset by what they were seeing on their TVs. And they came back with this idea that, we've been too accommodating to this protest movement, that we've been too accommodating to these young people. We are not seeing the rest of America. We have an obligation to speak for them. And at the same time, you had the Republicans laying out a very aggressive and explicit strategy of trying to influence the press. They called them the liberal media. They were constantly on them. We called it working the refs, remember? I mean, right. They were constantly going after them for being biased. There's an accumulation of that. It went all the way through. It greatly enabled Reagan. People were terrified. The press was terrified of saying anything against him because they knew they were going to get this tremendous blowback from conservatives. And it went, this has continued to this day. We saw it after Trump was elected. Nobody went into downtown Baltimore to see what they thought about the election. They went out to, the same sort of rural towns in middle America or in Pennsylvania or wherever to talk to Trump voters. And they did it over and over again as if these were the only people who counted. And we needed to know why, what is motivating them, and scant attention paid to anybody else in the country. I mean, this has been going on for a long time. I would have thought, however, that they would be able to see the difference between what has been republicanism up until now. And, look, even George Bush, after 9/11, he went to a mosque. He gave a big speech saying Islam is a religion of peace. Republican presidents up until now have known that this gross, violent underbelly in their right-wing movement was there. They understood it was there, and they would take steps. All of them did it at various times to tamp down any threat of violence from this group. They knew it was possible. And I'm not saying they aren't responsible for that part of their coalition as well. But they were cognizant of the fact that there was something explosive that was potential there, and they went out of their way to keep it down. Trump doesn't do that. He does the opposite. He goes out and he basically, stokes it and tries to, and says, hey, I'm with you, and we're all together in this, and I agree with you. I mean, even as you point out, when asked about the invasion rhetoric by the shooter in El Paso, he says, he dissembled and went on, and then he says, well, I'm against illegal immigration. I mean, he cannot help himself. So this is very different, and the fact that the press can't see this difference, I mean, this is, and again, we're painting with a broad brush. There are plenty of people in the media who are seeing it and who are writing about it and broadcasting it, but there remains in the sort of establishment press. I'm talking about, the New York Times particularly, but many of the networks and the elements of the Washington Post as well, that simply cannot grasp that this is different, that we are, maybe it's the culmination of the conservative movement, but it's different.
It is. Heather, couldn't have put it better. And thank you so much for covering the news with us this week, as horrible as it's been. Thanks for your insight.